I love the invitation to tonight's because I really, really love the theme of the night, visualizing knowledge. Finally, a change to the classic visualizing data. All right, so who am I? Hello, everybody. My name is Valentina De Filippo. I'm an Italian designer based in London. And I'm many things, I suppose. Creative director, data designer, illustrator. These are a few of the labels that I've used to kind of explain what I do. I run my own practice, and I scale up and down depending on the scope of the projects that I get. I work across industry and formats, from print to digital, physical, and experiential work. As you can see here from this collection of work, the data design that I create really take different shapes based on the data that I'm visualizing, the audience that I'm reaching. From books design, I've illustrated and co-authored this book, The Infographic History of the World. And here you can see a very quick sneak peek of a project that I'm working right now. An encyclopedia for kids by Britannica, to also interactive tools, applications, physical manifestation of data, as well as experimental. We brought data visualization inside live theater performances. And even during my TEDx, I had an element of performative data visualization. So the common denominator of all these different projects is data. And yes, absolutely, it is the visualization of data or the presentation of data. But ultimately, it is to convey and transfer the knowledge to an audience. So the really purpose of my practice is to make sure that the figures, the facts that I'm displaying, they don't remain numbers, but the stories emerge and people can connect with them. So how do we transform data into knowledge? I guess there isn't one path only to get there. It all depends on the raw material that we're trying to transform and who we're trying to reach. But I suppose like a simple place to start understanding this journey is this simple framework, the knowledge pyramid, where data sits at the bottom, is this raw material, is any description of the world, any facets of the world can be described with data. Then we process this data, we find the insights, and we transform it into information. And then when this information is received by our audience, can provide new knowledge, new ways to see the initial experience, the world that we live in. And if we do use the knowledge to navigate the world, then it actually can create wisdom. So what is data? Well, data are description of our world, of people's lives. Data really stands for any sort of human experience that we want to investigate. We can have it readily available for us with research or through databases. We can access it electronically through APIs. And if we don't have it, we can actually gather it. We can collect some data from, as I was saying, any sort of experience. And what I want to also touch on tonight is the missing data. So it's not only the data that we have, but also the data that we don't have that sometimes can provide some knowledge. And the process to transform the data is really the design process, design thinking, problem solving. How do we convert again this raw material into something that is meaningful? And data for me is truly a creative material. It allows me to satisfy my curiosity for the world and also to share my discoveries with other people. And I believe the design is the unique voice that I can give to this raw material to connect with him. Because data ultimately doesn't speak by itself. And when I'm giving the voice, I need to consider who is at the end of this bridge of communication, who is my audience, and what is the goal of this communication act. So again, to summarize, is about the starting point, it is data, what is the data saying, who we are trying to reach, and why, the ultimate goal. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you examples of my work, and kind of like with these examples, I'm not going to try to create an exhaustive answer to how we transform data into knowledge, but offer a starting point for conversation. So starting with a couple of examples of research-based data is the classic example when we have a data set and we need to transform it into a visual story that can then, again, provide some sort of knowledge. Here is a collaboration with Scientific American, and the data set is talking about food waste. I was tasked to represent the data and how much food is wasted across the entire supply chain, across different food categories. So in my mind, I'm envisioning the food being kind of like piled up and wasted in the field. And that's exactly how I use the visual metaphor and the visual encoding. Combining pattern recognition, so how we are encoding the data with height and then the colors to exemplify the different scenarios, whether we do nothing about it or we do something about it. And then semiotics, which is the pile of food, as well as borrowing the color of this pile. So we see these four piles, and the lighter colors are diminishing in volume to identify these two possible positive scenarios, whether we are adopting some strategy to save some of this waste. My job doesn't finish there. I'm thinking, well, is it enough to actually just render these data points? Or could I communicate in a more effective way with a metaphor to create a tangible connection to the numbers? So I'm thinking, what if I could actually transform this pile into number of cows? Every minute the world wastes the equivalent weight of 65 cows. And this could take us to 82 cows by 2050 if we don't do anything. However, if we do adopt these strategies that the paper is suggesting, then we could bring these numbers down to 24 cows per minute. Or if we're really conservative and also optimistic about what we can do, then we can get to 8 cows per minute. So it's a grim data set, but there is some hope. And I guess how do we transform data into information here is to create a tangible connections with the data to facilitate the way that our brain can read the data. That obviously is not optimal in a table. It becomes much more visible in a visual form, and to get you there to the subject. So rather than just using an abstract shape, I'm trying to deploy semiotics. Similar approach to this data project that is possibly one of my most well-known infographics from my book, The Infographic History of the World, called Poppy Field. It's a visualization of the conflicts of the last centuries. Again, the starting point is a database, is a data set. In this case, we're not looking at the future, but we're looking at the past. History is a data set that compiled the wars of the last century. I give it a form, and a very specific form, again, combining semiotics and a quick pattern recognition given us by a standard scatter plot. But instead of just stopping at the scatter plot, I'm thinking, who is behind those bubbles? What are those lives lost in war? Because really what I want to convey is the human sacrifice of conflict. Therefore, I dress up this scatter plot, this timeline, with flowers, and the poppy reminds us of the blood shed on the battlefield. The user is able to navigate this in an interactive way and to find different stories based on their own interest. I guess like the learning here is that our render doesn't stop as just like having deployed a nice visual or beauty, but it's really about whether this visual is compelling enough. It evokes emotion, it evokes empathy, makes people stop and think. Whenever we're communicating, we don't want to just communicate to our rational brain, but we want to engage the emotional side of people. And when we're engaging both is when we have a better chance to actually break through and for knowledge to stick and to become more memorable. So what if the starting point is not a data set, but we need to extract the data, so the data is not readily available for us? Well, we've got what we call databases, which are a collection of information. They're stored somewhere and we can access with code through an API. This is an example, a commercial example, a collaboration with Amazon Fashion in partnership with Make Associates. We were tasked to provide an alternative experience to browse their denim catalog for the fashion show in Berlin. So we created a 2-minute styling experience where the visitors of the show could actually find a perfect pair of jeans by conversating with Alexa. And by just answering 8 simple questions over 2 minutes, you are given the perfect pair or whatever would fit you, your taste. So I guess like the way that we're transferring knowledge here is to invite exploration in a non-classical way. So rather than using a browser, you're conversating, but also to facilitate decision-making, to really get us to what we need and what we want to buy in a much faster way. Another example of accessing information that is not readily available but is out there, is in the internet, is when we access the Twitter API. We scraped it and we retrieved 200,000 tweets containing the #MeToo hashtag. And we created MeToo. This was a collaboration with a brilliant developer, Lucia Konchinkova. And from this large amount of data, there was actually just a small drop in the vast amount of information that we had around the MeToo movement. We were able to paint 3 pictures to understand the trending voices, the geographical spread, and also the themes that were more popular among these conversations. Again, we offered an interactive way to investigate the data and to kind of like follow the evolution of this conversation along the 6 months after Alyssa Milano's first tweet. And I guess in this visualization, knowledge for me was actually recording all these voices and capture it almost in a time capsule that would celebrate them, would allow people to go back to it and to see them. And for me, the aesthetic of this piece also have an important role. I chose a dandelion because it kind of like conveyed my personal feeling about the MeToo movement. Every individual experience of abuse or violence was incredibly fragile when taken on its own. However, when all these voices came together, they were so strong they could actually create finally a catalyst for social change. And that's exactly how I saw the dandelion conveying these two, the duality of the movement is a fragile element. You know, you can just blow it and all the seeds go, but all the seeds can actually take hold on any soil and give life to other dandelions. So I guess here, for me, the knowledge was also about expressing a point of view and to amplify the message. And perhaps here I can also touch on the responsibility that you have as creators of manifesting our point of view and transparency on that, because every act of communication is not unbiased. So we should embrace it rather than shy away. What if we don't have data? How can we gather knowledge from something that we actually want to investigate or we don't have the data about? Well, we just need to pose the right questions. The starting point here wasn't a data set, wasn't a database, was a song. By listening over and over to Space Oddity by David Bowie and asking people how they felt, and also processing with technology, we were able to gather many layers of data. I collaborated with a musicologist, Miriam Quick, and we created 10 sculptures, LPs. Each sculpture represents a layer of the song, and then it was paired with animations and poster and an exhibition. And the intent here was really to make the invisible visible, to make people see what we feel, but also what we imagine when we're listening to the song, and to celebrate David Bowie as an artist, to gain a deeper understanding of his craft and how masterfully this song was put together. Another commercial project here, Siemens, and this is a collaboration with a data design studio called Signal Noise, who now is part of the Economist Group. we were tasked to celebrate Siemens' capabilities in making our city smarter. Well, we didn't have the data for that, but we knew that we wanted to do something about the partnership with FC Bayern. So we went inside the stadium and we thought, wouldn't it be cool to celebrate this partnership by using the voice of the fans? How can we gather this information? Well, we harvest it. We use the sensors. There are these three-dimensional microphones that allows us to create an omnidirectional sound map of the stadium. And by overlaying the sound that we harvested and the Opta data, so the data of the football matches, then we were able to create a data documentary of 5 games. And it was an experience. So still football, but it's through a whole new perspective. And finally, the last point is about the missing data. So often in the data design or the data visualization world, we just rush into thinking, okay, this is all the data available, this is what we're going to do about it, or how we're going to present it, how we're going to be visualizing it. However, it's really important to consider what the data offer, but also what is missing. For the next project, I think actually that was pretty crucial in my thinking, in my understanding of the topic, and also the sober reality that sometimes it's just not possible to provide an answer or a conclusive answer to a question as big as how has London been transformed through the pandemic, through the coronavirus. This was basically the brief that the Museum of London gave me. An incredible opportunity, but at the same time, like huge and intimidating and very doubting. How do you possibly visualize that? London is made of 9 million people. Every person had an individual experience of what the pandemic meant to them and how their life transformed. So I thought, what if I could create a landscape where these 9 million people could find their own stories by actually just allowing them to find themselves? To create space, really. So I created London Under the Microscope, again, some sort of data documentary, a time capsule, which encodes many layers of data, quantitative as well as qualitative, into this kind of like surreal geography of London that is being transformed to the morphology of the virus to create a suggestive and visceral landscape of the city. We've got the mobility on the membrane, we've got the COVID cases on the spikes, and the deaths. There are these particles appearing every day, and the vaccines. All this data has then been coded to be represented every day, so everything changed, and every day has been visualized as 1 second of this data documentary. Not only that, once it was presented and visualized, we overlaid editorial information to provide even more context, and then by collaborating with Duncan here, a sound engineer, data designer, data journalist, Duncan is many things, we overlaid also sound, and I want you to feel and to see 30 seconds of this. This is at the end of 2020, just before the announcement of the last lockdown. And here you feel the urgency and the gravity of the situation. So again, was not a conclusive answer, but was my attempt to create a space for the viewer to reflect on their own individual experience, but also be reminded of the collective experience. So just to sum up, I don't really have an answer of how do we transform data into knowledge, but I guess like these are my guiding pillar in the design process. The more than visualizing data, what we want to do is communicating to transfer knowledge, and to do so, we don't want to stop at the first step the visualization, of allowing people to see. That's crucial, and that's incredibly powerful, using well our pre-attentive attributes, right? The visual grammar, so that the brain has an effortless way to see the data. Semiotics, yes, but more than that, we need to think about who we're communicating to so that they can feel the data and the implication of this data. I'm looking at a bar chart. Do I understand the implication that these bars have? And then is the what. So what? After we've seen it, what do we want them to do? What is the shift of perception that we want to make? And it's only then, when we're creating really like a shift in people's mind, that I believe that knowledge takes place. Knowledge to understand better our world, but also to be connected with one another. So I do believe that the place that we have in designing data is incredible, and we have a responsibility in trying to do the best we can to transfer this knowledge across. So thank you so much for listening.